I'm getting ready to change out my Peep sight. I want to make sure my Peep and my front sight are as perfect as possible, but also a little bit smaller than normal for a hunting situation, because this is a bow that I'm shooting all summer long at outdoor, doing a lot of long range shooting. So the smaller that Peep, the tighter my groups are going to be, just because I've got less margin of error. This brings up a really important point. A lot of people ask me two things. One, how big of a Peep do I use? I pick a Peep size during the hunting season that allows me to gather a lot of light, be able to see my entire ring around, and also be able to see a sight that has multiple pins in it. So I normally go with a 3/16 Peep. Now, for my outdoor season, I go to a smaller Peep, and a lot of times a smaller front scope as well, just because I want to tighten all that picture up, because the less opportunity you have for margin of error, the tighter your groups are going to be, because you don't have that error. I want to show you this right here. So here's a little example. Let's say that this is the halo of your Peep sight. When you're looking through it, typically it's going to be black, right? So if you have your Peep sight over your front sight like that, you can see there's an opportunity to have some margin of error here, okay? Now the next question people ask me is, do I always only center the scope housing, or on a multiple pin sight, do I try to put each individual pin always in the center of that Peep? There's some people that do that. I personally do not. I've never been able to be consistent using each pin in the center of my Peep, and a lot of times your gaps are going to be really strange looking. They're not going to be consistent, where 20 to 30s like that, 30 to 40s like that, 40 to 50s like that, right? So I want that symmetrical pin drop, and by always fully making sure your Peep is perfectly eclipsed on the housing itself is going to help make sure that those Peeps are all, or the pins are always oriented in the center of the Peep. So here's something I want you to think about, and how important Peep orientation is to accuracy. So if you look at this right here, right now I've got this lined up so that the bottom edge of my Peep is right between that green line and that yellow line. So you can see I'm checked in about perfect there. I've got equal amount of space on the left side and the right side, so I'm not like that, I'm not like that. So I'm right there, okay? But let me show you the difference if you don't pay attention to this, okay? So let's say you pull back and you don't pay attention, so you're like that, okay? So you've got just a little bit of yellow under, you can see that full green bar, and you can obviously see the yellow bar. Or let's say you were like this, where you're right at the bottom edge, which is actually how I check in with mine. I check in at the bottom edge of my frame and the very bottom edge of my bubble, okay? So let's say that you're like that instead of like that, or even if you were like that instead of like that. Here's the difference. So that little bit of variation, let's say you're shooting 50 yards, okay? Here's a sight scale. So look at this. The difference between your Peep being on the bottom edge where it's supposed to be versus just under the green is 3.5 yards at 50. It's actually about 4 at 50. And this is with a sight scale 20, which is the most common sight scale. So there's 3.5 yards you would be off. 3.5 yards. It'd be no different than you setting this sight 3.5 yards off because that front sight, rear sight orientation wasn't correct. Okay, now let's go to longer distance, because everyone's asking me about how do I be more accurate at longer distances. Okay, now let's look at this. So let's say you're supposed to be on the very edge of that green. You're shooting 90 yards, but instead your Peep was right at the bottom edge of that bubble, okay? So right there, that is 4 yards. So that would be equal to you shooting that target for 86 yards instead of 90. So you can see how quick this right here, or I should say this, you should see how quick this variation instantly will change yardage and impact dramatically. So part of your shot routine has got to be checking in with the peep. I've got a great video on that. Check your peep orientation, walks you through an easy process that I have going from that 6 to 9 to the pin to the bubble to 6 to 9, showing you how to do that to make sure you're always checked in. Any variation you have right here is gonna instantly show up downrange. So I'm gonna go ahead and change mine out. I'm gonna go to a little bit bigger peep just so that I can perfectly see the outside glow of this white housing that I have. And that's a big reason why the knock-on NE sights that we have actually have white for this color instead of the flow yellow. For me personally, I've found that a black peep and a white front sight have always given me perfect contrast to know whether or not this is correct. For my eyes, multiple colors tend to drown that out. So black and white, I can either see the white or I can not see the white. I can either see daylight under the white or I can not see the daylight under the white. When you get that correct, when you pay attention to it, your long range groups are gonna freaking suck right down tight.